dir jetzt die Bühne.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to speak English, as you can hear. And before I start the presentation, I want to briefly present myself so that you know who I am, who is speaking today. My name, you can see it on the slide as well, is Anna Maria di Cesare, an Italian name. But I have studied and worked most of my life in Switzerland. I come from the University of Basel, and I'm at the TU Dresden. I have been here for over a year now at the Department of Languages, Literature and Cultures in the Institute of Romance Studies. I'm a linguist, and my specialty is the languages I work on most are Italian and French. And my domains of expertise are, I would say, in the fields of grammar. I have worked a lot on syntax, but also morphology. And then I'm also interested in questions that are related to sociolinguistics, gender aspects in particular, and text linguistics is also my field of expertise. And right now, since last year, I'm working on a new project related to automation, text automation. And this is also what I'm going to talk about here in the third part of the presentation. I have a case study on text automation. The general topic of this lecture is on Romance languages corpora. So I would like to say, I will tell you what, if you don't know it already, then I don't know exactly what you already know, but I'm going to explain what corpora are and what type of Romance languages corpora we have, and then focus on a very specific aspect related to corpora, which is tagging, in particular, what we call post-tagging. Post-tagging, I don't know if you're familiar with this concept. It's an abbreviation that stands for something that is very, very well known, parts of speech. Okay, so the outline is as following. It's fairly straightforward. So we are going to talk about what Romance languages corpora are, and then what is exactly post-tagging, what are POS, parts of speech, and what is tagging. And then I'm going to ask a question that puts those two questions together, if you want, and the question will be, why do we need post-tagged Romance corpora? What do we do with them? Or at least what did I do in the past research that I have done? You can do quite a lot of things, be it in relation to corpus linguistics, be it in relation to applied linguistics, be it in relation to text linguistics. And so I'm going to show you different research questions that you can ask. And answer to Romance languages corpora, focusing specifically on post tags. And then I'm going to, in particular, in this third part of the presentation, which is the longest and the most interesting, the case study related to automation and post tagging. Good, and then some closing remarks. But to get warmed up, I have brought two texts that are similar, and I would like to ask the following question, fairly simple. One is written by a human being or a group of human beings, and the other one has been generated by a machine. And so I would like you to tell me, or to write down for now, which one you think it's machine generated and which one is written by a human being. If you can also, what features did you recognize or you based your judgment on? And at the end of the presentation, we will provide the answer and we'll discuss this. So you have T1 and T2 to make it easier. And so which one is which? I leave you a few moments to look at these two texts. Okay. I hope you have found out this. There is no trick here in the sense that they're not both generated or both written by human beings. There's really one in each category. Okay, we'll come back to this and discuss this at the end. Let's now look at what women's languages corpora are. Starting with the definition of corpora, I have brought two definitions from Italian computational linguists. In particular, the first one is by Marco Baroni, very important computational linguist. And his definition goes as follows. Corpora are mostly large collections of oral and written text produced in real communicative contexts. For example, recordings of speeches or newspaper articles, stored in electronic format and often accompanied by computer search tools. I have highlighted in bold important aspects that characterize corpora, and in a few slides I will also give you again the list of properties that we use to define corpora, that are key to defining corpora. So this is the first definition by Marco Baroni, and then the second one is by Manuel Barbera. And his definition is a bit different, that's why I have brought it here. His definition is as follows. Corpora are collections of texts. They can be written, they can be oral, or can be multimedia or multimodal, we would say today, or parts of them. So not necessarily texts in their integrity, entire text, but corpus can also be made of parts of text in finite numbers, in electronic format, processed uniformly, in particular, and this is particularly important for corpus linguistics, what we call tokenized and appended with appropriate markup, so as to be manageable and queryable informatically. If, as often, the purposes are linguistic, for instance, we want to describe natural languages or varieties of languages, the texts are also chosen to be authentic and representative. Now, if we sum up these properties, we can list the 6 following properties, the most important. The first one is, of course, the size of the corpus. That is very important to take into account. Nowadays, we have what we call gigacorpora, a corpora made of billions of words. This is very important. In particular, those are written text, because for oral, it's more difficult to collect such an amount of text because you also have to transcribe the oral speech. So those huge corpora are corpora of written text. Then the second point is authenticity. The texts that are part of corpora are authentic. They are not invented. They're not invented texts. It would be difficult to invent such a large amount of text, by the way. They're also representative of, since they are samples, corpora always, even if they are huge, it's always a sample of a certain language or language variety. They are stored in electronic format. They are present in a finite number, and this is very important to us as well. It's not just a collection of texts lumped together and raw text, if you want. These texts are enriched through different markings we call markups, or if they are manual, we make a distinction between digital markups and manually annotated text. So make markups and annotations. And then on the basis of these markups and annotations, we can search these corpora and answer different kinds of research questions. So they are queryable. That's what is the interest of corpora. Okay, for Romance languages, a platform that is very useful, that I use personally a lot, is called Sketch Engine. And on this platform, you find already made corpora that are made available, or you can create your own ones. Here I have listed the corpora that are related to Romance languages. I must say that here, for Italian, for instance, most of these corpora, the 64, are my personal corpora that I have not shared so far. I will perhaps do it because the corpora that are available at the moment in Sketch Engine are not very numerous. But you have corpora of Italian, you have some of French, Spanish, the three major Romance languages, Portuguese, and then you have a smaller, but nevertheless very important Romance languages, Catalan, Romanian, and there is even one already made of Galician. So if you are interested in any of these, or also for purposes of language comparisons, is here ready-made corpora that we could use. I have also provided a link at the bottom of the slide with a list of different corpora in Italian, French, and Spanish, so that you can also find these corpora to this link. The web page has not been updated since 2014, so there have been more corpora coming that are not listed, but nevertheless, a very interesting site to look at, not only for corpora, but for digital instruments in general. Parts of speech and parts of speech tag sets. First of all, what are parts of speech? I would like to provide a linguistics and historical perspective on what are parts of speech first, before we go to their presence in the corpus linguistic and corpora. Parts of speech is something that is called in different languages in the same way. It's a very traditional denomination. It comes from, actually originally from Greek, and Greek, Latin took it as a calque from Greek. So in Latin, we talk about pars orationis, partes orationis. In French, partie du discours. In Italian, parti del discorso. And in German, Redeteile. It's a very ancient concept that relates to the classification of words. So if we look at the texts are made from words. On the words, it's not a very technical, it's not something, it's not a label that is to be intended technically. But nevertheless, texts are made from words to make it easier, and very ancient thinking about language was how to classify these words into groups. So these groups are called parts in the traditional denomination. Nowadays, we talk about word classes or lexical categories. Parts of speech are very, very important because they are ontological linguistic categories, serving as basis in the description of the vocabulary, the lexicon, or the grammar of natural languages. It is impossible to describe any language without resorting directly or indirectly to parts of speech. And they're really at the core of any description of language or language variety. As I said before, the practice of grouping words in parts, or classes or categories, is at least 2,000 years old and goes back to the Greek and Latin grammarians. I have brought a chart from Robert Robbins from '66, where he traces the development of word class systems in the European grammatical tradition. And so you can see, we're not going to look at this in detail, but you can see that the word system, the parts of speech that we know today, didn't come up at once, all of a sudden, but it developed over time, starting with Plato, who identified the first distinction between what he calls onoma and rema, so the noun and the verb, the predicate, we would say. And then the system got more articulated so that to arrive at the system that we know today. And what I think is particularly interesting is that the system that we know today, that is taught in schools, is practically the same as what the Greek and the Latin grammarians were already described. So nothing much changed in 2,000 years. This is particularly, I think, striking. In order to classify words, we have different parameters. Words can be grouped according and along to, here I have listed some of the parameters that allow us to classify words. morphology or phonologic parameters, such as their variability. So if they change in form. So this criteria is based on inflection. And do we have variable words or invariable words? That would be a parameter that allows us to distinguish two groups of words, but we have syntactic parameters. So what sentence slot words are occupied in a sentence, or lexical and semantic properties of a word. For instance, the degree of referentiality of a word. Then pragmatic and textual parameters, sociolinguistic, and last but not least, because this is very important also when you work with corpora, the frequency, the word frequency. So we have, and we make a distinction between absolute frequency, so the number of times a word occurs in a corpus, and the relative frequency that we use when we work with corpora that have different sizes, and we need to adjust the frequency to a certain number. Okay, so in the Western tradition, the most important parameter is that is also, I say all this because that's what we find in corpora. It's the first parameter, and in the Western tradition, words are primarily classified based on their morphological features. So if they are variable or invariable words. Today, even though inflection is not as prominent a feature as it was, for instance, in Latin, many grammars describing Romance varieties still largely follow the proposals made by the Greek and Latins 2,000 years ago. One of the most important common denominator of these grammars is the identification of plus minus 9 parts of speech. So here we are. Now I'm going to present you the parts of speech that you probably all know. This is something that we learn at a very young age at school, 9 parts of speech. So 5 variable or inflecting parts of speech, verbs, nouns, adjectives, pronouns, articles, and the 4 invariable or non-inflecting parts of speech, sometimes also called, for instance, in the German grammatical tradition, very important that we don't have in the Romance languages grammatical tradition, the class of particles, the Partikel. And so we have in the particles class, we have prepositions, we have conjunctions, we have adverbs, and we have interjections. So I guess you're all familiar with this list. That is probably something that we share. Now, we have seen what parts of speech are. Let's see now how they are represented in tag sets that we use in corpora. If we look at the definition given by Sketch Engine, the platform that I quoted before, that I mentioned before, the definition is as follows. A tag set is a list of parts of speech tags, POS tags for short, meaning label used to indicate the part of speech and sometimes also other grammatical categories such as case, tense of each token in a text corpus. So practically what Sketch Engine is telling us here is that a tag set is nothing else than a list of tags related to parts of speech. So tags of, you would have a noun, the verb, the adjectives, and so forth, related to, and here you have another concept that I would like to clarify, because I don't know if you're already familiar with this, tokens. No, token. So if we look at this screenshot, it's a screenshot of, I've searched the noun borsa in a corpus of Italian financial texts. And what I wanted to show you is that, again, in a corpus, you don't just have raw text, but you have these annotations that make it interesting, because these texts are enriched by different annotation. And here you have the annotation of the parts of speech. So, for instance, borsa, you find underneath the N, small n, that is the abbreviation for noun. And then you have a column, and this is important because this is, of course, not a part of speech, but is a token. So that's the difference between words and tokens in the corpus linguistics terminology. Token is every graphic segment in a corpus So that can be a word, but it can also be all the punctuation signs that are present in a corpus, or numbers or other symbols. So in this case, you have, so borsa is a noun, then you have for the column, you have an X that represents the, here in this case, everything that is related to punctuation. Then you have Europa, so that's a noun, prosegue, a verb, in, a preposition, and you have, and so forth. So you have all these words that are attached, associated to a tag that is mostly related to parts of speech, but there is also something else. Okay, and this is done automatically. If you create a corpus on this platform, it immediately annotates it without you having to go through thousands of words and annotating these texts. Doesn't mean that it's always correct. There are actually many mistakes, but this, at least there is one first annotation that or markup that is done automatically, which is quite handy nevertheless, regardless of the mistakes. Okay, so now what are the research questions that we can answer with these corpora that are annotated and that annotate the parts of speech? These are only 3 possible areas and 3 possible questions. There are many more, but these are the ones that I have been working on in the past years. So I wanted to give you some examples of these questions. In the same field as corpus linguistics, an important question is what parts of speech are used in Romance languages corpora tag set, and what new parts of speech should we postulate? And because we have seen that parts of speech are the ones that we find in grammars are these 9 traditional parts of speech. That's what we find in traditional grammars, but in general linguistics, we have moved on more, and we created several new parts of speech that are actually not considered in these tag sets. So the question would be, should we, what's the advantage, the disadvantage of revising these parts of speech tag sets? Probably it will lead us to also different results, different research questions. So I think it's important to revise these tag sets, which is not something that is really that is done at the moment. Another question is related to applied linguistics. And a possible question is, how can parts of speech guide and inform language teaching practices? In particular, this is something I've worked on. If we consider the intercomprehension method, that is related to what is common between languages, in the intercomprehension method, the focus is on what is common and what can be considered to be a positive transfer. So if you, for instance, if you know German and English, I suppose, for you it would be easy if you want to learn a new language and you learn a new, say a new Germanic language, for instance, Danish. I should stay with the Romance languages. So you know already French and you want to learn Italian or Spanish. In the intercomprehension method, you would start with everything that is common to French and Italian and Spanish, and that would serve as basis to then build up your knowledge and expand your abilities to understand and to speak Italian and Spanish. So post-tagging in this sense is very useful because we can identify what is common in relation to different parts of speech. And I want to give you an example. I go back to this slide for the last question, but I would like to give you a concrete example of what is possible to do with corpora. So in the post-tag of the corpora, you have the tag adverb, but often you also have a more specific tag, which is related to the form of adverbs, so the morphology of adverbs. In particular, you have the tag mente or mon-derived adverbs in the Romance languages. And what you can do with this is you can search all the adverbs ending with this suffix in here 3 Romance languages. And you can search so everything that every form that is similar or even identical. And what you can also do is you search the frequency of these different forms, so that you find the same form and the same frequency, and you identify elements that are easy to or not easy, more than easy, that you should already know in a sense. So here, for instance, if we take the example of the first row, finalmente, finalement, and finalmente in Spanish, the 3 similar forms with the frequency that is also fairly similar. So there are good chances that if you start from French finalement, that you would immediately understand finalmente in Italian, Spanish finalmente as well. It's the same form. So the idea is to sort out everything that is common and to present it also in the language curriculum, to present these forms in the first lessons, to then build up on this and go towards aspects that are different from the language you already know. So this is an application that is useful in applied linguistics. And then there is this is the third question here, in relation to text linguistics. So here, one question that I'm particularly interested in at the moment is how can POS help us, POS parts of speech, help us in distinguishing different kinds of text typologies, text categories, in particular, different digital text typologies. Okay, so this I have already talked about. And here we come to this case study. Case study related to the difference, and this is the considered two text typologies or text categories, automated versus human written news, and the role of post tagging. Before we then consider the role of post tagging, important to make a distinction between what are automated text, human written text. I don't have to define. We all know what it is. But what are automated text? I've provided 2 definitions here. One that is non-technical, and the other one that is a bit more precise. The first one is from Data Ninja, a data provider, an Italian data provider that also developed a writing software that wrote the text that I will then describe in a moment, on which I have based my case study. And in the definition of Data Ninja, the automated texts are defined the following way. The automated written texts are texts that no human being writes on a keyboard and rereads before its publication. So this is fairly interesting, because it seems that human beings play absolutely no role in text automation, which is not really true. So this is why, but these definitions we find very often, and they're somewhat misleading. So we should be careful with these kinds of definition. That's why a better definition, or more accurate, is the one by Carlson 2015 that says following: algorithmically produced text result from algorithmic processes that convert data into text with limited to no human intervention beyond the initial programming. So in this case, there is a human intervention, at least in the initial programming of the writing software. So what is also important to notice in this definition is the first part converts data into a text. Automated text also defined by simply by a label data to text. So let's look at one concrete examples. Here we have 10 template-based generated titles of an article in English. And what we can see very clearly, well, it's a simple sentence that I divided in syntactic constituents. So you have a subject, you have the verb, you have the object, and an adverbial. And what you can see very easily is that there is one piece, one segment that never changes. Here in this case, it's the object. It's in every title, there is the same segment, which is the session. So this is what we can call a fixed segment. And then what else do we notice? We also see that there are segments that change in these titles. Especially evident are in the last column, the numbers. In every generated title, you have a different number. And these numbers are related to a database with structured data. And in this case, we have what we call a gap so imagine you have a sentence where some pieces are already written beforehand by a human being. And then there are gaps, holes that are filled by numbers and data that are taken from a database. So in this case, we see it fairly clear because the number changes in every title. And then we have something else that is very, very interesting. It's something that changes as well. You have here the same for the subject and the verb. If we look at the verb, for instance, we have two different verbs. We have ends and closes. And these are synonyms. They're not based on, so they are synonyms. And it's different than the gaps that I have just described with relation to the numbers. These segments vary, but they vary for stylistic reasons. So that the text itself, and especially the generated texts in a group, are not too repetitive, but at least they have some stylistic variation. So yes, this is the gap, and I have another slide to show you even to give you again to identify what is changing in these texts, and in relation, I say all this in relation to the data, the definition data to text. What is here to be identified or understood as data are the numbers that changes. So to this very simple example of the title, we can see that there are pieces written by a human being. That is a part of what we call a template. There are segments that change all the time, related to a database with numbers or proper names, can be also other things than numbers. And then we have these stylistic variants. Here again, another slide to show you the way it works. You have here on the left-hand side a screenshot of French automated text in the domain of finance. And in the right-hand side, a screenshot of what we call structured data. Where we have it's an Excel sheet with columns relating to proper names, or here the values of the stock market, and then the performance of each value at the stock market, which is then the data that enter into the gaps of a text that has been pre-written. So we are talking about text automation based on templates. These templates have been written by human beings, so there are also human beings play a role. This is different from texts that are automated from scratch. For instance, if you're familiar with GPT-3, that are produced based on a short prompt. You can just enter, I don't know, the bottle, I don't know, any kind of a prompt that you can imagine, and the text would be generated on the basis of this short prompt, being a word or a couple of words. Here it is different because you have a text pre-written with these holes practically that are filled with data. Okay, the application domains of template-based automated text are very varied. First of all, these texts are nowadays fairly common, although we don't recognize them. It's not easy to recognize them if they're not explicitly identified as such. But we find them in these domains that I've listed here, for instance, in private companies, in e-commerce. They are very, very, nowadays, practically standard. So if you want, give you an example, if you want to buy a piece of clothing on the internet, you go to a website and you find thousands of descriptions of a shoe, a pair of shoes, or a shirt. It's clear that no human being has written all these texts that are very similar and that are nowadays completely automated on the basis of these templates. Another application is in the public service. Automated texts are used to inform on the weather or the traffic situation. Another application that I find particularly interesting is the one reported in François Portet et al. In 2008, where text automation has been used to aid decision-making in neonatal intensive care, so at the hospital in the neonatal care where you find newborns, ill newborns or premature babies, and these texts were automated to help doctors and nurses to make decisions, because they found out that it was easier to have a short summary of how a baby was doing in respect to the graphs that we all know in the hospital with just numbers, raw numbers. So they transformed these numbers, the data, into text to aid these decision makings in the neonatal intensive care. And the last application domain of these texts is in the news industry. This is also nowadays fairly common in the news industry, where according to Porlezza 2020, these texts are nowadays practically institutionalized in many established media. For instance, Le Monde, the very famous and very important French daily newspaper, used text automation for the first time in 2015 after regional elections to report on the results of regional elections. So the interest in this case is that Le Monde was able to provide a text for each French commune, and we're talking about 15,000 communes. So again, text automation allows to generate these texts and to address what we can call also micro audiences, because you have practically one text for each commune, which is overnight not possible to do a task that is impossible to do by a human being. So you have text automation in politics, in sports, in the financial domain, and in health. And I'm not going to go too much into this question. Short state of the art in the research, as far as the research is concerned, automated texts are, especially in the media, automation texts produced in the media are analyzed by scholars working in media and communication studies. This is not surprising. And here the methods that they use, or one of the research questions they are interested in is the following. How are automated texts perceived in relation to human written text? Do readers identify these texts, perceive that they are automated or not? And if yes, on what grounds? What are the features? Exactly the same way I have started with these two texts. The same in what we call perception studies. The group of interviewees are asked to describe what they perceive. So in these perception studies, people are asked to comment on different features that they perceive as special, if you want. We have a lot of research done on this, especially on English. And then we have another small but very important study done by Stevenels 2019-20. It's actually a master thesis. This I think is important for you, because it's quite a groundbreaking master thesis done on automated text, because there's almost nothing done in this field, in the Romance language at least. And it's interesting not only because it's for the first time a study on French and not on English, but also the methodology that she used is very innovative, because she uses the methods of corpus linguistics. So she creates two small, but nevertheless, methodological corpus linguistic, two small corpora of articles, automated articles, 30 automated articles written by human beings in the soccer domain. That's the domain she focuses on, and 30 articles automated. And then she, I can show you this already now. She has a set of predefined linguistic and textual parameters that she uses to analyze these texts and to identify, pick up if there are differences. The parameters that she uses, you can see them here, concern the text length, for instance, if there is a difference between automated and different human written text. So text length measured in numbers of characters, the form and the function of the article titles, and then things like the word choice, spelling, and punctuation. And you have on the left-hand side, you have another example of automated text that has been automated on the sites, the Belgian site lameuse.be in the domain of soccer. Let's move on. Yes, here you have a note that says that this article has been written by on the basis of data taken from a database. It doesn't say it has been automated. It doesn't explicitly say. It says that it has been written on the basis of this database. Now, what question I'm interested in? Actually, I'm interested in the same question as the colleagues working in the field of media and communicative studies, but with the linguistics perspective. Because as you have seen, the features that are important are linguistic features. So word choices, punctuations, and the like. So the goal of my research right now is finding a methodology that is suitable to describe the quality, what I call quality, but it's not in the sense, okay, they're not well written and they're very, very well written. In the sense, quality in the sense of the features of these texts, of automated text, as well as to uncover their specificities compared to human written texts. And the features that we could use to assess if there are differences are very numerous. So, of course, POS, and this is what is the whole point, POS tagging, and parts of speech and the lexicon. But important other features are syntactic features, punctuation, and the organization of the text in general, be it macro units or micro units. So let's look at the data that I've used for this case study. I have collected text coming from the financial domain in Italian. You have here an example, and on the right-hand side, some characteristics of these texts. So if we look at some quantitative aspects, we have organization of this text. This text is made of 6 paragraphs, approximately 300 words. And the last aspect, which is important because we need to find texts that are similar in order to compare them to human written texts. We cannot pick a novel, that would be absurd, right? So we have to find a text typology that is similar to these automated texts, and the closest in terms of text typology would be news releases or news dispatches that look like this. So this would be an example of human written text that you find on here the website of a news agency, Thai news agency, ANSA. And what is important for us to say in particular is that it looks very similar from the macro units, 4 paragraphs, and also the size, 291 words. So this is a closely associated text. So what I did is that I collected 100 texts that were generated and 100 texts that were human written. And you can see in this chart already some figures related to quantitative properties of these 2 small, I would say, micro corpora. In this case, if we think about the sizes of the corpora right now, these are micro corpora, but nevertheless, even if they're micro corpora for generated text, this is enough for us to see patterns and recurrences in the automated text. So what do we find? Also, we have, in terms of sentences, we have 2,000 sentences for the automated text. The abbreviations are the following. On is automated written news, and the other one is HWN, is human written news. So you can see that the sizes vary in terms of sentences, words, and tokens. This is not so important for us. We have to look at relative frequencies in order to compare these 2 corpora. So the results related to POS taggings, the POS for these 2 corpora, the following. Here you have on the right and on the left hand side, this time you have the human written the corpus, and on the other one, the automated one. What we can see is that there are 9 parts of speech in each one. Okay, this is not surprising. Since in every text you have that has some length, you find these 9 parts of speech. More interesting is the difference between some of them. And now we want to identify the macroscopic difference between these 2. And one very, very macroscopic difference is the use of the verb. So in the human written news, we have roughly 60,000 words that are labeled as verb, while in the automated text we have double the size. We have 100,000. So this is already quite a difference that are easily identifiable to the parts of speech. Another very important difference is, so verbs is a lexical category, but there is also a very important difference in the usage of the conjunctions, so a grammatical category. And here we have the reverse pattern, in the sense that conjunctions are much more frequent in the human written texts. We have 27,000 roughly, and are 10 times less frequent in the automated texts. So again, pretty important difference. Now, okay, those are quantitative numbers, but we also want to know more about the differences in terms of the verb and the conjunction. So if we look at the most frequently used verbs in the 2 data sets, we find that we have the 2 first positions are occupied by what would be in English the equivalent of to be and to have. So those are also used as auxiliaries, and that's not surprising that we find them in the top first 2 positions. But what is now a difference that is significant is that in the human written text we have a gap between the verb essere, to be in Italian, and avere, to have. While in the automated text, if we look at the relative frequency, there's absolutely no difference. So that is, again, a difference that is important. Now, in the table, I've provided the number of lemmas and the relative frequency of these lemmas. And here we find something that's probably to be expected, which is the following. In the human written text, we have many more different verbs, different lemmas that are related to verbs. So there is the usage of a richer vocabulary, we can say. So in the human written news, we have 221 different verbs that are used, while we have only 18 in the automated text. And also important is to look at not only the number of lemmas, but their relative frequency. So if we look at the second row, we see that these 18 verbs occur 3,000 times in the corpus. So a very small amount of verb, but that cover a lot of occurrences. And the reverse for the human written ones, 224 verbs that cover half of the occurrences of the automated text, only 1,724. The same patterns we find for the conjunctions. The conjunctions in the human written text are only 9. And here you have the list. So the first one is the conjunction e in Italian, which corresponds to and in English. The second one is mentre, which is while. And the third one is ed, which is just a graphic variant of e. So we have 9 conjunctions, while in the automated text we have only one, which is mentre. And again, we have a difference between the number of lemmas and the number of tokens that these lemmas cover. Okay, closing remarks. First of all, just as now coming back to the initial question, which one is which according to you, or perhaps not identifiable? Of course, this is an option, perfectly legitimate. And if you indeed picked one as being generated on what grounds? That would be really, really interesting to know. So from your reaction, I have the impression that you were not really... Yes?
I would guess that the first example is a computer-generated text because... switch it. So the second is the computer-generated because the first has a paragraph in the middle that is a lot nested. And I don't think that computers will do this.
So the feature that was, I didn't quite understand.
It's the nesting of the sentence. So there's a lot of commas and hierarchy in the sentence.
Okay, yeah.
In the first one. In the first one, yeah. And so the second is computer generated.
Okay, yeah. So based on the complexity of the organization of the sentences. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. Other ideas or other comments?
Any ideas?
Who was not able to find a difference? Who thought, okay, I cannot see, I'm not going to pick one that is generated. So indeed you found one that was generated, and which one?
The second.
The second two? Yeah.
Maybe because the structure of the sentence don't verify that much as, for example, in the first one, it's almost every time the same structure, just with different numbers and different words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the numbers play a very important role. Yeah.
I think maybe type token ratio in the first one is more higher than the second one. That's very, very clear to see. And I think the structure of the sentences is very easy and We have the trailing, the session,
Yeah.
and goes up, goes down, and the percentage, and then again.
Yeah, exactly. Because if we look at the first text, we actually, perhaps it doesn't seem that we have so many numbers, but there are quite a bit of numbers, and it's well, the percentage is not written with a symbol, but it's written in words, %. So we have a lot of numbers as well, but but it would be we would have to measure the number ratio, yeah. And the first, perhaps yes, but it's interesting because the syntactic aspects usually are not so, people are not so sensitive to the complexity of sentences. So it means you're already quite trained linguistically to identify differences. But it's true that the second one, simpler sentences that read almost as a list, because you have, okay, this value has performed in this way, and the second sentence about second value, and so it's very listical, the text, with much less variation on the sentence structure. So yes, that's exactly the case. The second one is the generated one, and that's the website, or the website on which you can find this generated text. And here, demain.ai is the software that is the writing software that generates these texts. Good. I'm almost done. For then, if you have questions, I wanted to provide two more observations. The first one is that many perception tests actually do not identify people answering, participating in these tests, do not pick a difference between automated and non-automated. And I think that is partly due to the fact that if you see each text individually, because here we have also, on the same slide, you had automated and human written, but if you see each one individually, they're actually pretty well written. And so they are, if you look at and you have to evaluate each text individually, it's difficult to say that is automated, because these softwares have a good quality, and so they write good text. The ones that are template based. Now it's different if you compare human written to automated, or if you have a sequence, of course, of automated. There it's obvious, like we have seen in the titles at the beginning. Why? Because here you have a screenshot of I think it was at 20 segments, and I've searched the conjunction mentre, which is found in every text. So in every text, you have exactly the same construction, the same syntactic construction with this conjunction. So that's crystal clear that these texts have been automated. A last slide here with the differences related to parts of speech in human written and automated news. So we have seen we have no difference in the number of POS. There are 9 in each case. It's not surprising. What we have is a huge difference in the lemma per POS ratio, the much higher lemmas per POS in human written text, both in relation to verbs and in relation to conjunctions, and probably also in relation to the other parts of speech. The lemma token ratio is also different, and what is different is the lexical variation, which is higher in the human written news in relation to automated news. And if we look at the grammatical variation, we can also see that the set of relations that are expressed by conjunction, such as in English it would be and, but, and nevertheless. In the human written text, you have a much richer set, which is to be expected, because there are different relations that these texts describe. In relation to the automated, which are actually, there's only one mentre, which is while, and this is odd to have just one expressed. In particular, what is odd is also the fact that these texts, in these texts, there is no conjunction, and there is no, which is one of the most frequent words in Italian and in other languages, the conjunction and. And this is absent. So this again also, the features that are absent are also very telling. It's not just the ones that are present, but the ones that are absent are also telling us a lot about the nature of these texts. And this is it. If you want a bibliography, I didn't want to list it in these slides because it's always too long and we don't have time, but you can click on the link and you can find a list of bibliographical reference in the cloud store of the TU Dresden. Thank you very much.
So I'm very thank you. We shut down the stream and discuss later. Yeah?
Yes.